Ayo. Soul rings, soul beasts, these two new terms echoed in Tang San's mind incessantly. Although he couldn't be sure if his guess was correct, his inability to break through the bottleneck in his Shen Tian Gong clearly indicated that the soul ring was a breakthrough point. At this moment, Jack had already come to his senses. He lowered his head and looked at Tang San in amazement. Little San, you're not that kid with innate full soul power and the blue silvergrass martial soul that the master mentioned, are you? Tang San nodded. Yes, it's me. Old Jack squatted down, facing Tang San. Little San, I didn't expect your talent to be so outstanding. It's a pity that you have such a father who didn't pass down a good martial soul to you. Otherwise, you might really become the second soul saint in our village. Tell Grandpa, do you want to go to a specialized school to learn the methods of becoming a soul master? Only there can you find the most accurate knowledge about martial souls. At this point, Tang San had already developed a strong interest in martial souls, especially since his martial soul was related to his own Shen Tian Gong. But he still didn't give a direct answer. Grandpa Jack, I have to ask my dad about this. Jack suddenly realized. Of course, no matter how sensible a child was, he still needed to consult Tang Hao's opinion. With a determined look in his eyes, despite his reluctance to see that unkempt guy, Jack couldn't care less. Let's go, little San, Grandpa will take you home. Jack first went back to the other children and let their parents take them away before taking Tang San back to the blacksmith shop. In the morning it was Tang Hao's usual sleeping time and the blacksmith shop was quiet. Tang Hao, Tang Hao. Jack didn't care whether Tang Hao was sleeping or not. He really despised this unkempt blacksmith. If it weren't for the fact that the tools he forged were so cheap, he would have kicked Tang Hao out of the village long ago. While calling out for Tang Hao, Jack's eyes swept around. He wanted to find a chair to sit on, but looking at those shabby things, he didn't have the courage to pull one over. He was already quite old, and he didn't want to break a bone here. Who's making all that noise? Tang Hao's slightly angry voice rang out, and he pushed aside the curtain at the back door and walked out slowly. He first saw his son, then turned his gaze to Jack. Old Jack, what's going on? Jack said impatiently, today is your son's martial soul awakening day. Do you know how important it is? Other parents accompany their children, but you, as usual. Tang Hao seemed to ignore Jack's sarcasm. He turned his gaze back to his son. Little San, your martial soul awakened? What is it? Tang San replied, Dad, it's blue silvergrass. A blue silvergrass? For some reason, Tang Hao's body trembled slightly when he heard those three words, and his eyes revealed a special light. Tang San noticed Tang Hao's change of expression, but Jack naturally didn't care about the expression of an unkempt blacksmith. He said directly, although it's blue silvergrass, but little San has innate full soul power. Tang Hao, I've decided. The quota for the village's part-time workers this year will be given to little San. Let him go to the Novice Soul Master Academy in Nuoding City to learn. The village will cover the travel expenses. Blue silvergrass, blue silvergrass. Tang Hao murmured to himself a few times, suddenly raised his head, and his eyes revealed a firm light that Tang San had never seen before. He said in a deep voice, No. What did you say? Am I hearing things? Jack rubbed his ears in surprise and looked at Tang Hao incredulously. You should know how precious this opportunity is. Even our Saint Soul village, even though it once had a soul saint, only has one slot a year. In other villages, it's even 2 or 3 villages sharing one slot. Do you know? This is a great opportunity. Maybe little San will become exceptional in the future. Tang Hao looked coldly at Jack. What's the use of being exceptional? All I know is if he leaves, there will be no one to cook for me. Blue silvergrass, do you think a blue silvergrass martial soul can be cultivated into something? It's just a waste martial soul. Jack angrily said, but he has innate full soul power. As long as he gets a soul ring, even if it's the worst quality one, he can immediately become a soul master. A soul master, do you know? It's been many years since we had a soul master in our village. Tang Hao said indifferently, that's your real purpose, isn't it? I said no, and that's final. You can leave. Tang Hao. Old Jack's anger had reached its limit. Tang Hao still had a lazy look. No need to shout so loud, I'm not deaf. I said you can leave. Grandpa Jack, don't be angry. I won't go to learn how to become a soul master. Dad is right, blue silver grass is just a waste martial soul. Thank you for your kindness. Although Jack despised Tang Hao to the extreme, he really liked the sensible Tang San. His anger gradually subsided, and he sighed, good child, Grandpa is not angry. All right, I'm leaving. With that, he turned and walked outside. Tang San hurriedly sent him off. His father could ignore him, but Jack was the village chief and had been very kind to him. He wouldn't be rude. Jack stopped at the door of the blacksmith shop and turned to look at Tang Hao, speaking with emphasis, Tang Hao, your life may end like this, but little San is still young. Don't you think you should give him a means of livelihood? Don't delay him. Becoming a soul master, at least he won't end up as miserable as you. If you change your mind, come find me. There are still 3 months until the registration time for this year's Novice Soul Master Academy in Nuoding. Tang San saw old Jack off, feeling somewhat disappointed himself. After all, what Su Yunhao said about soul rings might relate to his breakthrough in Shen Tiangong. But he didn't show it, he believed there would still be opportunities. Slowly returning to the blacksmith shop, Tang Hao surprisingly didn't go back to his room to continue sleeping. Instead, he sat on a chair, closing his eyes to rest. Dad, why don't you go back to your room and rest? I'll prepare lunch, Tang San suggested. Still with closed eyes, Tang Hao asked softly, are you also feeling disappointed? Do you also want to become a soul master? Tang San paused. It's okay, Dad. Being a blacksmith is fine too. It can still support us. Didn't you promise to teach me how to forge farm tools? Tang Hao slowly opened his eyes, and Tang San saw a hint of excitement in them. Unconsciously, Tang Hao's right fist clenched, and a chilling aura emanated from his aged face. A soul master? What's the use of a soul master? Even if it's not a waste martial soul like yours, what can the most powerful soul master achieve? Nothing but being useless. Tang Hao's emotions were intense, his body trembling, and Tang San could see a hint of glistening in his father's eyes. Hurrying over, Tang San grabbed Tang Hao's fist. Dad, don't be angry. I won't become a soul master. I'll always be here with you, cooking for you. Taking a deep breath, Tang Hao's excitement subsided as quickly as it came. Release your martial soul for me to see. Okay. Tang San nodded and raised his right hand. The Shen Tian Gong within him quietly activated as he felt the unique heat merging with his energy. A faint blue light appeared in his palm, and in an instant, a shining blue grass emerged. Staring blankly at the blue-silver grass in Tang San's hand, Tang Hao seemed lost for a moment before gradually regaining his composure. His eyes flickered with uncertainty as he murmured, blue-silver grass, it really is blue-silver grass. Just like hers. Suddenly, Tang Hao stood up abruptly, almost causing Tang San in front of him to stumble, and the blue-silver grass martial soul in his hand disappeared on its own. Dad. Tang Hao wava impatinti. Don't bother me. With that, he lifted the curtain and went back inside. But I have another martial soul. Tang San still revealed his unique trait after today's martial soul awakening. This was a question he hadn't asked Su Yuntao and Jack, after all, they were just outsiders. Tang Sect's Shen Tian Record General Outline, Article 1, Never let anyone you can't fully trust know how powerful you truly are. Tang San was well versed in the Shen Tian Record, especially its general outline, which he strictly adhered to. As the curtain was violently lifted, Tang Hao appeared again in the outer room. This time his face was full of astonishment. His eyes were red as if he had shed tears just now. Tang San remained silent and slowly raised his left hand, similar to when he raised his right hand earlier. This time, instead of blue light, a faint black light gushed from his palm, condensing into something peculiar. It was a small, entirely black hammer, about half a foot long with a cylindrical head. It looked like a miniature forging hammer, but on its black surface, there was a special light and faint patterns swirled around the cylindrical head. For some reason, when this hammer appeared in Tang San's hand, the air in the room felt oppressive. Tang San seemed unable to bear the weight of the small hammer and could only hold onto it, his arms slowly drooping. His face had turned somewhat pale. Unlike the blue-silver grass, which hardly required any Shen Tian Gong consumption, this black hammer absorbed almost all of Tang San's internal energy as soon as it appeared. He could barely control his grip on the handle. Although the hammer looked small, its weight far exceeded that of a forging hammer. What is this? Tang Hao almost instantly came to Tang San's side, grabbing his hand holding the hammer. His grip was strong and Tang San no longer felt the burden on his arm as much. When Tang Hao's hand held his, Tang San felt a warm connection. Dad, what's wrong? Looking at the black hammer, the excitement that disappeared before now reappeared in Tang Hao's eyes. Dual martial souls. It's actually dual martial souls. My son, my son. Suddenly, Tang Hao opened his arms wide and tightly embraced Tang San. Tang Hao's chest was broad, perhaps due to his long-term work as a blacksmith. Although he looked lazy on the surface, his muscles had not diminished over the years. His embrace was warm, and the sense of security it brought was irreplaceable. Dad. Tang San was a little stunned. In his memory, this seemed to be the first time Tang Hao hugged him like this. The small iron hammer in his hand seemed to be getting heavier and heavier. Although Tang San liked the warmth of his father's love, he didn't want the hammer to slip and hit his father. Dad, I can't hold it anymore, Tang San couldn't help but say. Tang Hao released his arms. I'll put it away. As the black light dissipated, the weight disappeared. Tang San felt strange. It was clearly a hammer formed by a special force in his body, but why couldn't he lift it? What surprised him even more was that after summoning the small hammer, his internal energy was almost completely depleted. Tang San had never seen his father's face so expressive before. Various complex emotions kept appearing on Tang Hao's face. After a while, he slowly said, "Remember, in your future, you must use your left-handed hammer to protect your right-handed grass. Forever." Tang San nodded, puzzled. Tang Hao stood up without looking back and went back to his room. As Tang San prepared lunch, he pondered on the world of martial souls he had encountered today. Dual martial souls seemed to be rare in this world, otherwise his father wouldn't have been so surprised. It seemed like his own hammer martial soul had greatly moved him. More importantly for him, however, was the relationship between martial souls and Shen Tian Gong. If that soul ring was the key to his Shen Tian Gong breakthrough, then he would have to find a way to obtain a soul ring to test it. During lunch, Tang Hao seemed very silent and his appetite seemed less than usual. His gaze often fell on Tang San, as if hesitating about something. After finishing lunch, Tang San habitually prepared to clean up, but Tang Hao stopped him. Wait to clean up later. Xiao San, let me ask you, do you want to become a soul master? Tang San hesitated for a moment, then nodded, not wanting to deceive his father. Tang Hao sighed, his face looking even older. You still choose to walk this path after all. With just this sentence, he returned to his room. Tang San noticed that when Tang Hao sighed, there was disappointment in his emotions, but more than that, there was a sense of relief. He understood that there were many things hidden in his father's heart. After cleaning up the dishes, Tang San returned to his room to continue his work. The rhythmic clang of the forging hammer against the iron block filled the air. Although he didn't know when he would be able to forge the iron block to the fist size Tang Hao requested, this method of forging had significant benefits for improving his use of Shen Tian Gong and was also effective for body conditioning. Tang San had begun trying to swing the hammer using as little Shen Tian Gong internal energy as possible so that he could maintain it for a longer time with each consecutive strike. When the afternoon's hammering had reached over 300 strikes, and the iron block seemed to have purged some impurities, the curtain was lifted and Tang Hao walked in. He didn't seem to be forging farm tools this afternoon, at least Tang San hadn't heard the familiar sound of hammering. Dad, Tang San looked at his father, and the hammer in his hand unconsciously stopped. Tang Hao gestured for him to continue and stood aside, silently watching. Tang San resumed swinging the hammer. By now, his clothes were soaked with sweat. With his current internal energy, he couldn't regulate his body temperature adequately, and this was definitely a labor-intensive task. With each clang, Tang Sen's small body swung the hammer fiercely. Tang Hao thought to himself that with innate divine power and full innate soul force, it was no wonder this kid could swing the hammer at such a young age. Perhaps old Jack was right, he shouldn't let his own decadence affect the development of this child. Let him choose his own path in the future. Watching Tang San sweating profusely, Tang Hao finally made up his mind. Stop, Tang Hao said. Tang San put down the hammer in his hand, slightly out of breath, quietly activating his Shen Tian Gong to recover his strength. Tang Hao walked to Tang San's side, took the hammer from his hand, and looked at the red-hot iron block on the stove. With the way you're hammering, even a year won't turn it into the size of a fist. Tang San looked up at his tall father. Then what should I do? Tang Hao said coldly, tell me, when you swing the forging hammer to strike it, which part of your body exerts force first? Tang San thought for a moment. It should be the waist. Starting from the waist, then the back, and then the arms swing the forging hammer? Tang Hao neither affirmed nor denied Tang San's statement, continuing to ask, besides the brain, what's the most important part of the human body? The heart, Tang San answered without hesitation. The heart, like the brain, is instantly fatal, and while the brain is protected by the skull, the heart has only skin and muscles. As a disciple of the Tang sect, he knew the human body's structure very well, and using hidden weapons to pierce the enemy's heart was the most effective and concise way to kill. Tang Hao paused before saying, then tell me, how many hearts does a person have? Tang San looked at him in surprise, somewhat confused. How many hearts does a person have? Answer me, Tang Hao said coldly, his imposing figure making Tang San feel breathless. One, Tang San replied. Tang Hao shook his head. No, you're wrong. Remember, a person has 3 hearts, not 1. 3? Tang San stared at Tang Hao in astonishment, not understanding what he meant. Tang Hao turned the forging hammer in his hand and tapped Tang San's 2 calves with the hammer handle. Here. The muscles on a person's 2 calves are the second and third hearts. If a person wants to exert all their strength, it must be the result of all 3 hearts working simultaneously. So, when exerting force, it's not from the waist. The starting point is the 3 hearts. When your heart in the chest beats rapidly, start exerting force from the 2 calves, transmit it to the thighs, pass through the waist, back, and arms, and finally release it. That's a full force strike. The heart exerts force, and the waist acts as the axis. Watch. Tang Hao's forging hammer slightly lifted, causing Tang San to step back a few steps. At the same time, the hammer had already turned back, emitting a low shout. Tang Hao's body half-turned, his feet firmly planted on the ground, the 2 legs exposed from the torn trouser legs tensed up instantly. He looked like a tiger ready to pounce, with the legs exerting force, the waist turning back, and the forging hammer already brought back in the invisible, making a loud clang as it fell heavily on the red-hot iron. Tang San could clearly feel that this was the process of a person's physical exertion. Tang Hao had no internal energy or martial soul release, this was purely the power of the body. The previously red-hot iron block collapsed nearly a third, with significant deformation. Using the legs to exert force, connecting the body's strength into one whole, is called full force. Tang Hao handed the iron hammer back to Tang San. Your turn. Okay, Tang San had never thought that forging would have such a technique. This method of exerting force was not as simple as it seemed in forging. It should also be applicable in his Tang sect martial arts. Grasping the hammer handle with both hands and imitating Tang Hao's previous posture, Tang San stared closely at the red-hot iron block. His Shen Tian Gong slowly operated, penetrating deep into his legs as he firmly planted his feet on the ground. With a loud shout, Tang San's leg strength and Shen Tian Gong simultaneously erupted, power bursting from his calves, instantly spreading throughout his body, waist rotating, back leading to the shoulders, and then to the arms. He clearly felt that his strength seemed to become unprecedentedly powerful. From the burst of strength in the calves to the swinging of the hammer by his arms, his body seemed to be lifted by this force. When the forging hammer accurately struck the iron block, making a loud noise, Tang San's entire body was lifted off the ground due to the swinging of the hammer, taking a step forward. Although there were no issues with his hands thanks to mutual support of Shen Yu hands, his arms were shaken by the rebound force, feeling sore and numb. Fortunately, his Shen Tiangong was activated in time, gradually alleviating the discomfort. The effect was evident. Although Tang San's effectiveness with this strike was not as significant as Tang Hao's due to his age and the additional use of Shen Tiangong, it was enough to resist dozens of previous strikes. Watching Tang San's movements, Tang Hao didn't give any evaluation, but from the flash of surprise in his eyes, Tang San's performance was obviously better than he had expected. Tang Hao had not expected Tang San to master this method of exerting force in such a short time. What he didn't know was that Tang San had been practicing Tang sect martial arts diligently, with a solid foundation in Shen Tiangong and techniques like controlling crane catching dragon and ghost shadow perplexing track, along with Shen Yu hands, which greatly enhanced his coordination. With his good comprehension, mastering this technique of exerting force was naturally easy for him. Of course, this was only the first time and he was not yet proficient. "Dad, did I do it right?" Tang San asked.
Tang Hao nodded slowly.
Do you understand the function of the heart? The most used muscle in a person's body is the calf. The calf is the root of all strength. Using the calf's strength well will greatly increase your power. Saying that, Tang Hao sat down by the bellows, pulling out something made of wrought iron from below. It was something like 2 petals. Tang Hao connected it under the bellows and held the bellows with both hands. In forging, the bellows role is also very important. With the metal burning fully, it can be better forged because it makes it more resilient. Any piece of metal, no matter how impure, has its own soul. If the temperature is not high enough and the force is too great during forging, causing it to break, even if it is remelted and forged again, the metal will only become scrap. So, when you strike the iron block with full force, you must maintain its temperature. Pulling the bellows is also using the calf's strength. Not only can it reduce energy consumption as much as possible, but it can also maximize the effectiveness of the bellows. Stepping on the 2 pedals, Tang Hao suddenly exerted force. Starting from the legs, his whole body quickly bounced backward, and his arms naturally moved to open the bellows handle. With the legs straightening and then bending again, he returned the handle. Between each pull and push, the bellows operated at full capacity. Tang Hao's movements didn't seem fast, but each action made the bellows' power reach its maximum. Under the guidance of the calf muscles, the body and the bellows formed a special rhythm, and flames suddenly rose from the furnace, making the iron block instantly glow red. "You try pulling the bellows, following my movements," Tang Hao gave his position to Tang San. With the experience of swinging the iron hammer before and careful observation, Tang San quickly grasped the method of pulling the bellows. Although still a little awkward, under his careful attention, each force was initiated from the calves. Indeed, as Tang Hao had said, not only did it save a lot of energy, but the effect was also much better than before. Tang Hao held Tang San's forging hammer and said lightly, "Forging with full force can fully exert your strength, but at the same time, each strike will also impose a great burden on yourself due to the rebound force. Without proper guidance, not only will it be easy to injure yourself, but it will also cause some of the strength to be lost, unable to act on the metal. Watch my movements carefully, this will be the key to whether you can forge this iron block to the size of a fist in a short time." Taking a deep breath, Tang Hao's eyes became focused as, with Tang San pulling the bellows, the entire iron block was already glowing red, and the blazing flames made the room unusually hot. Tang Hao moved. His actions seemed no different from before, using his legs to drive his waist to drive his back, and his back to drive his arms. With a clang, the hammer struck the iron block. As the hammer bounced back due to the reaction force, Tang Hao suddenly turned, still using the power from his legs. The rebounding hammer was already swung by him in the air, making a strong wind sound, and with another loud bang, it landed on the iron block again. This strike was not only incredibly fast but also seemed even stronger than the first. The hammer flew high again, and Tang Hao's movements seemed to achieve a perfect harmony with the hammer's bounce. Neither too early nor too late, just as the hammer was about to reach its highest point, his body led the hammer to spin one round and then strike again. Tang San's eyes brightened. This was clearly a technique of leveraging the rebound force, turning the collision between the hammer and the metal into the power for the next strike. The movements were perfect and coordinated, maximizing the avoidance of harm from the rebound force and turning it into continuous strikes. From the second strike onwards, each strike exceeded Tang Hao's full strength, yet he still controlled it perfectly. Tang Hao's movements became faster and faster, the forging hammer striking the iron block like raindrops. The block continuously deformed under the hammer's blows. What was surprising was Tang Hao's accuracy. Whenever the iron block was struck to about half its original thickness and began to flatten, his hammer would land on the edge, causing it to flip. This ensured the iron block endured the strikes evenly, rather than being simply flattened into a pancake. In an instant, 36 strikes were delivered. Tang Hao's hands swung the forging hammer in the air for 3 rounds before dissipating the force and stopping. He showed no sign of fatigue or breathlessness, as if the intense strikes from earlier were effortless. The entire iron block had shrunk by a full circle between these 36 strikes, making it almost impossible to see impurities with the naked eye. This was true blacksmithing skill, a beautiful hammer technique. Do you understand now? Tang Hao looked at Tang San, who was continuously operating the bellows. Tang San pondered for a moment and said, "Using force by leveraging force, I understand the principle. But it seems not simple." Tang Hao said calmly, "To achieve my level, there's only one way: practice makes perfect. Also, remember, when striking a piece of ordinary metal, it's most likely to fracture when it has the most impurities. At that time, you need to reduce your strength. As the impurities decrease, you can gradually increase your force while maintaining the effectiveness of your strikes. The key lies in controlling the force. Practice on your own. Don't blindly increase strength and speed. Accuracy is equally important. At least you should know where your hammer will land, otherwise, what's the use of strength?" The forging hammer returned to Tang San's hands and Tang Hao left. His father didn't break his promise. Indeed, he taught him the method of forging. From what his father taught him, Tang San understood that every profession had its own mysteries and was not as simple as it seemed. In the following month and a half, Tang San practiced the forging method that Tang Hao had taught him every day. Although he had the assistance of controlling crane capturing dragon to control the force and purple demon eye to determine the position of his strikes, mastering this forging technique was even more difficult than he had imagined. Since it was a full-force strike, controlling the force itself was difficult. Leveraging the rebound force, controlling the body's balance, and ensuring the hammer landed where he intended were all extremely challenging. With each additional strike, the required level of control increased. The constant spinning not only made his head dizzy but also made it even harder to control the force of each strike. Fortunately, he had been striking the iron ore for a long time, and its impurities were now minimal, making it less likely to shatter under his uncontrolled strikes. However, during this practice, Tang San's application of the Shen Tian skill, as well as the coordination between controlling crane capturing dragon, purple demon eye, and purple god claw, improved imperceptibly. From the first day when he could only wield 2 hammers and deviate from the target, to today, half a month later, when he could continuously wield 7 hammers and strike accurately on the iron block, the progress was very obvious. At the same time, the iron block became smaller and smaller under his full-force strikes, showing results every day. Of course, this was closely related to the method of using leg strength. With this method, the consumption of Shen Tian skill was greatly reduced, allowing Tang San to have more time to pull the bellows and forge. When his father wielded 36 hammers and still seemed to have spare energy, he only had 7 hammers. He didn't know when he would reach his father's level. Every time Tang San thought about this, he was particularly motivated in his practice. These days, he seemed to have forgotten about his martial soul and soul rings. Even when he went to the mountaintop in the morning to practice the purple demon eye, he was thinking about how to wield the hammer. 3 months passed quickly. When Tang San could continuously strike 13 times with the hammer, Tang Hao began to teach him how to forge tools. Tang Hao's teaching method was straightforward. He would demonstrate first, then let Tang San do it himself. As long as he showed some progress, Tang Hao would let him practice on his own without too much verbal guidance. Only at critical moments would he say 1 or 2 sentences. Because of this, Tang San remembered Tang Hao's teachings particularly clearly whenever his father gave instructions.